My friend, everything you think you know about learning martial arts is wrong. You've been collecting techniques like stamps, Wing Chun trap here, boxing footwork there, maybe some Zen quotes to sound wise, but you're playing with toys while the real treasure sits buried underneath. Here's what shattered my world. I was sparring with a Western boxer who had never heard of centerline theory. Yet every punch he threw followed centerline principles perfectly. Then I fought a fencer who knew nothing about Wing Chun's simultaneous attack and defense, but every move he made was simultaneous attack and defense. That's when it hit me. These weren't different fighting methods. They were different languages describing the same physical laws. Gravity doesn't care if you call it ki sinking or lowering your center of mass. Leverage doesn't change whether you learned it in a Shaolin temple or a wrestling gym. The human body operates by the same biomechanical principles, whether you're Chinese or American. So I stopped learning martial arts and started excavating the laws that make all martial arts work. Every technique became a clue. Every tradition became an archaeological site. I wasn't collecting moves anymore. I was hunting the fundamental principles that every effective fighter discovers, whether they know it or not. Here's what I found buried beneath centuries of cultural decoration. There are maybe 24 core principles that govern all effective combat. Everything else is just cultural packaging. Distance, timing, leverage, balance, momentum, structure. These don't belong to any style. They belong to physics. Today, I'm going to show you how to dig beneath the surface of any knowledge system and extract these universal laws, because once you see them, you'll never be imprisoned by any single tradition again. You'll have access to the source code that all effective systems run on. The first archaeological tool I developed came from growing up between two worlds that were supposed to be enemies. In Hong Kong, my Wing Chun Sifu taught me that all attacks must follow the center line, the shortest path between you and your opponent's vital targets. This was ancient Chinese wisdom, passed down for generations. Then I moved to America and watched boxers who had never heard of centerline theory. Yet every effective punch they threw traveled the exact same path my Sifu had shown me. They just called it the shortest distance between 2 points. Later, I studied fencing and discovered they had their own term, line of attack. Same principle, same biomechanics, same devastating effectiveness. 3 different cultures, 3 different languages, 1 identical truth. And that's when I realized most people can't see past the cultural costume. A Chinese master demonstrates centerline, and they think this is Chinese kung fu. An American boxer shows the same principle, and they think this is Western boxing. They're blind to the fact that both are just different dialects of the same universal language. My archaeological advantage was simple. I grew up bilingual in violence. I could see when different traditions were saying the same thing with different accents. Here's the process I developed. First, strip away the cultural clothing. Ignore the stance, the ritual, the traditional names. Look only at what the technique actually does to solve a specific problem. Second, identify the naked principle underneath. Not the Wing Chun version or the boxing version, the physics version. What law of biomechanics is being exploited here? Third, test if this principle works regardless of cultural packaging. Can a Wing Chun student use boxing footwork? Can a boxer apply fencing distance management? If the principle is real, it should translate across all contexts. Fourth, translate it into your own cultural language. Don't try to become Chinese to use Wing Chun principles. Don't pretend to be European to apply fencing concepts. Extract the principle and express it through your own body, your own background, your own natural movement patterns. This cross-cultural translation became my secret weapon. While other martial artists were trapped inside single traditions, arguing about which style was superior, I was collecting universal principles that worked for any body type, any cultural background, any fighting situation. The principle doesn't care what language you speak. It only cares whether you understand what it's actually saying. The second tool came from a revelation that shocked me. Most martial arts instruction is just choreographed theater. When I started acting in Hollywood, I learned the difference between looking like you're fighting and actually fighting. On camera, everything had to be clean, visible, dramatic. Real fighting is ugly, fast, and often invisible to the audience. But here's what horrified me. I realized that most martial arts schools were teaching the movie version. Beautiful forms, perfect demonstrations, techniques that looked impressive but crumbled under real pressure. I developed what I call the actor's truth test. Every technique, every concept, every piece of knowledge has to answer 4 brutal questions. First, can you do this under pressure or only in demonstration? I watched masters perform flawless techniques in class, then fall apart completely when someone actually resisted. If your technique only works when your partner cooperates, you're not learning fighting, you're learning dance. Second, does this technique serve you, or are you serving the technique? Too many martial artists become slaves to perfect form. They spend so much energy maintaining the correct posture that they have no power left for the actual purpose. The technique should make you more effective, not more constrained. Third, would this work against someone trying to hurt you? Not someone playing by your rules, not someone respecting your tradition, someone who wants to damage you and doesn't care how pretty your response looks. I tested everything this way. That fancy spinning kick looks amazing in movies. Try it against someone who wants to take your head off. You'll find yourself on the ground wondering what happened. Fourth, is this knowledge alive or just a memorized pattern? Living knowledge adapts. It responds to new situations. It grows stronger under pressure. Dead knowledge just repeats the same movements regardless of what's actually happening. This test destroyed about 90% of what I had been taught. Painful, absolutely. But what remained was pure gold, techniques and principles that worked whether the cameras were rolling or someone was actually trying to hurt me. The actor's training taught me that truth and performance are often enemies. If you want to look good, you make different choices than if you want to be effective. Most people choose looking good because it's safer for the ego. But effectiveness doesn't care about your ego. It only cares whether you can deliver results when everything is on the line. Once I started applying this test ruthlessly, I could walk into any martial arts school and immediately separate the performance artists from the real fighters. The real knowledge was always hiding behind the theatrical display, waiting for someone honest enough to dig it out. The third tool came from my dance training, and it's the most brutal truth of all. Your brain is a liar. I could teach you the cha-cha steps in 5 minutes. You'd understand the pattern perfectly, know exactly where your feet should go, when to turn, how to lead. But put you on a dance floor with music playing and a partner in your arms, and you'd stumble like a drunk. Why? Because understanding and knowing are completely different things. Your nervous system doesn't care what your brain thinks it knows. It only responds to what you've actually trained it to do under pressure. This is why most martial artists can explain their techniques beautifully, but can't use them when someone's trying to punch them in the face. Here's my verification process. First, intellectual understanding. You grasp the concept mentally. Second, physical practice. You train the movement slowly, safely, with cooperation. Third, pressure testing. You attempt it against someone who's actually resisting, trying to stop you, making it hard. But fourth is where most people quit, nervous system integration. This is where the technique becomes invisible, automatic, available even when you're tired, scared, or confused. When it's no longer something you do, but something you are. I learned this from watching dancers versus martial artists. A real dancer doesn't think about the steps during a performance. The music moves through their body and the steps happen. A real fighter doesn't think about techniques during combat. They see an opening and their body fills it instantly. Most martial arts training stops at step 2. Students practice forms, memorize combinations, then wonder why nothing works when the pressure is real. They're trying to fight with their brains instead of their nervous systems. Your body is smarter than your mind, but only if you train it properly. Knowledge that stays in your head is just entertainment. Knowledge that lives in your nervous system is power. Now we dig deeper, and here's what I discovered that will shake your faith in tradition. Most ancient wisdom is actually cultural garbage that accumulated over centuries. Picture this. Some brilliant fighter 300 years ago develops a devastating technique. It works perfectly. Then his students add some ceremony to honor their teacher. The next generation adds philosophical explanations to sound sophisticated. The generation after that creates formal stances to look more traditional. By the time it reaches you, the original technique is buried under layers of cultural sediment. You're not learning the fighter's discovery, you're learning centuries of accumulated decoration. I developed 4 questions that cut through this sediment like dynamite. First, what would this look like if invented today? Strip away the ancient postures, the ceremonial bows, the mystical language. If a modern person solved this same fighting problem right now, what would they create? Usually something much simpler and more direct than what tradition handed down. Second, what problem was this originally designed to solve? Most people learn techniques without understanding their purpose. That elaborate Wing Chun form wasn't created for beauty. It was designed to train specific combat responses. Once you know the original problem, you can judge whether the current method still solves it effectively. Third, how much is tradition versus function? I found that most martial arts were maybe 20% effective technique and 80% cultural decoration. The bowing, the uniforms, the formal greetings, the ancient terminology, all sediment. The functional core was usually tiny compared to the ceremonial wrapper. Fourth, what happens if I remove the ritual and keep only the purpose? This question terrified traditional masters because it revealed how little of their teaching was actually necessary. Remove the horse stance ceremony, keep the leg conditioning. Remove the formal salutations, keep the respect for training partners. Remove the mystical explanations, keep the practical principles. When I applied this sediment removal process, entire martial arts systems collapsed down to a handful of useful principles. Techniques that took years to master traditionally could be learned in weeks once you removed the cultural interference. The most shocking discovery: the older the tradition, the thicker the sediment. What people called ancient wisdom was often just ancient confusion that nobody dared to question. Real wisdom doesn't need cultural protection. It stands up to scrutiny. It improves when you strip away the decoration. The functional core gets stronger when you remove the ceremonial shell. This is why I could absorb useful elements from any tradition so quickly. I wasn't learning their entire cultural system. I was excavating the functional ore buried underneath centuries of accumulated ritual. The second layer of excavation revealed something that revolutionized how I approached learning. Your opponent is the greatest archaeological tool you have. Most people see opponents as obstacles to overcome. I learned to see them as knowledge-revealing instruments. Every person who resists you, challenges you, or tries to defeat you is conducting a free audit of your understanding. Here's the brutal truth. You don't know what you don't know until someone forces you to find out. I could practice Wing Chun trapping hands for hours against cooperative partners. Perfect technique, beautiful flow, total confidence. Then I'd spar with a boxer who had never heard of trapping, and suddenly my mastery crumbled. The boxer wasn't trying to teach me. He was trying to hit me. But in the process, he revealed every gap in my knowledge that cooperative training had hidden. This is opponent archaeology in action. Every technique that fails under resistance reveals a gap in understanding. Every strategy that crumbles under pressure exposes theoretical knowledge disguised as practical skill. But here's what made my approach different. I started deliberately seeking out different types of opponents, like an archaeologist, choosing different excavation sites. Fight a wrestler. Discover your takedown defense doesn't exist. Fight a southpaw. Realize your footwork only works against orthodox fighters. Fight someone much taller. Find out your distance management is pure fantasy. Fight someone much shorter. Learn that your techniques only function at your preferred range. Each opponent type becomes a specialized archaeological tool, designed to excavate specific types of ignorance you didn't know you carried. The key insight: resistance doesn't just test your knowledge, it reveals knowledge. When my Wing Chun sticky hands met a boxer's constant motion, I didn't just learn that sticky hands had limitations. I discovered principles about adapting to non-cooperative timing that no Wing Chun manual ever taught. When a wrestler shot for my legs and my beautiful stances collapsed, I didn't just learn about takedown defense. I discovered how balance actually works under sudden directional changes, knowledge that improved every aspect of my fighting. This is why I could never understand martial artists who only sparred within their own style. You're not testing your knowledge, you're just confirming your shared delusions. It's like archaeologists who only dig in their own backyard and wonder why they never find anything new. Real opponents don't care about your theory. They don't respect your preferred range, your comfortable timing, your traditional responses. They attack your weaknesses, whether you want to acknowledge those weaknesses or not. And that's exactly what makes them perfect teachers. They force you to evolve beyond your current limitations, because staying within those limitations means getting hit, thrown, or submitted. The opponent becomes your research partner in discovering what actually works versus what you hoped would work. Every sparring session becomes an archaeological expedition into the depths of your own ignorance. And this is why I sought out fighters from every possible background, not to prove my style was superior, but to let each tradition conduct its own audit of my understanding and force me to discover knowledge I never knew I needed. The deepest archaeological layer requires understanding something most fighters never consider. You have a finite energy budget, and every technique is either an investment or an expense. My dance training taught me that professional dancers think like accountants. Every movement has an energy cost. Waste energy on unnecessary flourishes, and you'll be exhausted before the performance ends. But invest energy in movements that generate power while conserving effort, and you can dance all night. Fighting works the same way, but most martial artists are energy bankrupts who don't even know they're broke. I developed an energy economics audit with 4 brutal questions. First, does this technique give me more energy than it costs? A perfect punch that connects should energize you by demoralizing your opponent while simultaneously positioning you for the next attack. If your technique leaves you more drained than your target, you're making a losing investment. Second, am I working harder or working smarter? I watched kung fu practitioners throw elaborate combinations that looked impressive but required massive energy expenditure. Then I watched boxers end fights with simple economical movements that preserved their energy while devastating their opponents. Smart always beats hard. Third, what's the minimum effective dose of this knowledge? Most techniques are overcomplicated because instructors add unnecessary elements to justify their teaching. Strip away everything except what's absolutely required to achieve the result. The most efficient techniques often look boringly simple. Fourth, how does this compound over time? Energy-efficient techniques get stronger as a fight progresses because you maintain your power while your opponent exhausts himself. Energy-wasteful techniques create debt that compounds. You get weaker with each exchange while your opponent gets relatively stronger. This audit destroyed most of what I had learned. Those beautiful flowing combinations, energy expensive, those elaborate defensive sequences, bankruptcy in motion, those traditional stances that required constant muscular tension, pure waste. What survived was shocking in its simplicity. The most effective techniques were usually the most economical. They accomplished maximum results with minimum energy investment, leaving you stronger for the next exchange instead of weaker. True knowledge should make you more efficient, not more complicated. False knowledge burns your energy budget on theatrical displays that drain your power without delivering proportional results. This is why efficiency became my religion. Not because simple techniques are easier to learn, but because energy efficiency is the ultimate test of whether knowledge is genuine or just expensive decoration. Now comes the synthesis. And here's where my ballroom dancing gave me an insight that revolutionized how I combined techniques. Logic lies, but rhythm tells the truth. Most martial artists try to connect techniques like engineers building bridges. They think, after this punch, logically I should throw this kick. But logic ignores timing, breath, momentum, and the natural flow of energy through your body. Dancers know better. When I learned the foxtrot, my instructor never said, logically, After the sidestep comes the promenade. She said, feel the music, let the rhythm carry you from one movement to the next. The transitions happened naturally because they followed the musical structure, not logical planning. I realized fighting has its own music, the rhythm of breathing, heartbeat, tension and relaxation, advance and retreat. Techniques that flow with this natural rhythm feel effortless. Techniques that fight against it feel forced and drain your energy. Here's my rhythmic integration process. First, find the natural rhythm of each technique. Every punch, kick, throw, or defensive movement has its own internal tempo. A jab is quick and sharp, like a staccato note. A hook follows a longer circular rhythm. You can't force them to follow the same beat. You have to understand their individual musical signatures. Second, identify connection points between different systems. This isn't about logical compatibility, it's about rhythmic compatibility. I found that Wing Chun trapping flows beautifully into Western boxing combinations, not because they're logically similar, but because their rhythms complement each other like instruments in an orchestra. Third, test combinations under flow, not static positioning. Most martial artists practice combinations like they're learning dance steps, slowly, statically, with pauses between movements. But real rhythm only emerges under continuous motion. You have to test whether techniques actually connect when your body is moving dynamically. Fourth, let rhythm reveal which combinations are natural versus forced. Your body knows the difference even when your mind doesn't. Natural combinations feel like you're being carried by momentum. Forced combinations feel like you're fighting against your own energy flow. This is why I could integrate techniques from completely different martial arts so seamlessly. I wasn't trying to make logical sense of how Wing Chun and boxing should work together. I was listening to their rhythmic patterns and finding where those patterns naturally harmonized. A Wing Chun Pak Sao flows into a Western boxing cross because their rhythms are complementary. The redirecting motion of the Pak Sao sets up the linear explosion of the cross. Not because it makes logical sense, but because it follows the natural musical structure of combat. Most fighters sound like amateur orchestras, each technique fighting for attention, creating noise instead of music. But when you understand rhythmic integration, your combinations become symphonic. Each technique enhances the others, creating something more beautiful and more powerful than any individual movement. The rhythm doesn't lie. If a combination feels awkward, forced, or energy expensive, it's because you're fighting the natural music of movement. But when you find combinations that flow with the rhythm, fighting becomes as natural as dancing to your favorite song. The second synthesis principle shattered my understanding of conflict. What looks like opposition is often just reflection. I was sparring with a Tai Chi master and a karate champion on the same day. The Tai Chi master moved like water, soft, yielding, redirecting my force back at me. The karate champion moved like a hammer, hard, direct, smashing through my defenses. They seemed like complete opposites. Soft versus hard, yielding versus aggressive, internal versus external. I thought I was learning two different approaches to fighting. Then I realized they were both solving the exact same problem. How to neutralize my attack while creating an opening for their counterattack. They just approached it from opposite sides of the same mountain. The Tai Chi master redirected my force and used my momentum against me. The karate champion absorbed my force and overwhelmed it with superior power. Different methods, identical result. My attack failed. Their counterattack succeeded. This is the mirror principle in action. Opposing styles often reflect the same fundamental truth from different angles. Watch soft styles versus hard styles. Soft styles solve the problem of incoming force by yielding and redirecting. Hard styles solve the same problem by meeting force with superior force. But both are solving the force equation. They just choose different mathematical approaches to the same calculation. Linear movements versus circular movements. Same truth, different geometry. A straight punch takes the shortest path to the target. A circular punch takes the path that avoids the opponent's defenses. Both seek to deliver force to target while minimizing the opponent's ability to stop them. Internal methods versus external methods. Different focusing mechanisms for identical power. Internal styles develop power from breath, relaxation, and whole body integration. External styles develop power from muscle conditioning, structure, and aggressive training. But power is power, regardless of how you cultivate it. Individual training versus collective training. Opposing philosophies producing similar results. Some systems emphasize solitary practice, forms, meditation. Others emphasize partner work, sparring, group dynamics, but both aim to develop skill, timing, and fighting ability. The breakthrough came when I stopped seeing these as contradictions and started seeing them as complementary perspectives on universal principles. Why choose between soft and hard when you can understand the principle that makes both effective? Why argue about linear versus circular when you can recognize the timing and distance principles that make both succeed? This mirror principle allowed me to synthesize approaches that other martial artists thought were incompatible. I could use Tai Chi yielding principles in the same combination as karate striking principles because I understood they were both expressing the same deeper truth about force management. The mountain doesn't change whether you view it from north or south, but viewing it from both directions gives you a complete understanding that no single perspective could provide. Most martial artists pick one side of the mountain and declare war on the other side. They become hard-style purists who think soft styles are weak, or soft-style purists who think hard styles are crude. They're fighting reflections of their own incomplete understanding. But when you recognize that opposing styles are often just different angles on the same truth, you can learn from every perspective without being trapped by any single viewpoint. The mirror shows you that your enemy might just be your teacher wearing a different face. The final synthesis principle is the most important. Everything I've shown you leads to creating something alive, not collecting something dead. Traditional martial arts are museums, beautiful, preserved, unchanging. You learn the same techniques your teacher learned, who learned them from his teacher, who learned them exactly the same way 50 years ago. These systems are corpses, perfect but lifeless. I discovered that real mastery means creating a living system that grows stronger through conflict, adapts to new challenges, and generates solutions you never trained for. Here are the 4 characteristics that separate living systems from dead collections. First, they improve through opposition. When my approach met resistance, instead of breaking down, it evolved. Every opponent who exposed a weakness forced my system to develop a stronger response. Dead systems just repeat the same techniques regardless of whether they're working. Second, they adapt to new environments. I could fight effectively whether the opponent was a wrestler, a boxer, a street fighter, or a karate champion. My system morphed to match the challenge because it was designed for adaptation, not preservation. Third, they generate new responses spontaneously. This is the miracle of living systems. They create solutions you never consciously learned. Under pressure, combinations and tactics emerged that I had never practiced, but that perfectly solved the immediate problem. Fourth, they remain effective across different contexts. Whether I was sparring in a martial arts school, acting in a movie fight scene, or facing real street conflict, the system worked because it was based on universal principles, not context-specific techniques. Most martial artists spend their lives building beautiful monuments to dead knowledge. They perfect techniques that worked centuries ago and wonder why they feel inadequate against modern challenges. But when you understand knowledge, archaeology, and synthesis principles, you don't create monuments, you create organisms, living systems that breathe, grow, adapt, and evolve every time you use them. The goal was never to master Wing Chun or boxing or any specific style. The goal was to create something alive that could absorb useful elements from any source while remaining uniquely mine. This is why I never taught a Bruce Lee style. I taught people how to excavate their own principles and create their own living systems, because a living system can't be copied. It can only be grown. Now comes the ultimate verification, and this will shatter everything you think mastery means. Here's my final test. Can you abandon your system and still be effective? Not modify it, not adapt it, completely abandon it and still remain who you are as a fighter. This sounds like madness, but it's the only true measure of mastery. If you need your system to be effective, then your system owns you. If you can abandon your system and remain effective, then you own the knowledge. I discovered this during sparring sessions, where everything I had trained simply disappeared. No Wing Chun, no boxing, no techniques at all, just pure response to what was happening in front of me. And in those moments, I was more effective than I had ever been while consciously applying any system. That's when I understood the deepest archaeological truth. All external knowledge is just a path back to internal reality. Every technique I learned, every principle I excavated, every synthesis I created, they were all just shovels for digging down to what was already there. The knowledge archaeology doesn't teach you new truth. It removes the layers of conditioning, cultural programming, and false learning that buried your natural effectiveness. Like an archaeologist uncovering an ancient statue, you're not creating the statue. You're revealing what was always there, waiting beneath the sediment. This is why children learn martial arts so quickly. They haven't accumulated enough false knowledge to bury their natural responses. This is why some fighters with no formal training can be devastatingly effective. They never learn to doubt their instincts. The paradox is profound. The goal of accumulating knowledge is to become free from needing knowledge. The purpose of learning systems is to transcend systems. The reason for developing techniques is to move beyond techniques. True mastery isn't carrying the perfect collection of responses. It's becoming the kind of person who generates perfect responses spontaneously, whether you've trained for that specific situation or not. When you've excavated deep enough, you discover that the principles you've been seeking externally were actually internal laws you were born knowing. Efficiency, timing, balance, distance. These aren't concepts you learn. They're aspects of intelligence you uncover. The archaeological dig ends when you realize you were never learning anything new. You were just remembering what you had temporarily forgotten. My friend, I don't collect techniques. I excavate principles. I don't absorb knowledge. I uncover what was always true, then let it live through me. And when you reach that depth in your own excavation, you'll discover that you don't need to become like Bruce Lee. You need to become completely yourself, because that's where the real knowledge was hiding all along.